Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Pierre the Chef. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steve, as you might imagine, and I am joined, as you also might imagine, if you've ever seen the show before, by my good buddy Christopher. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah, won't bore you with details, just life going on.
That's good. That's good. So I guess the number one question that we always have to ask is where's Pierre? And actually, this time I have the answer to the question. We've chosen for our subject this time. We're going to talk about how TV shows produced in different eras of history sort of reflect the times in which they're made, and it was sort of it was an unfortunate creative difference because Pierre IM'd me the other night, and he said, "I've got 30 minutes on the French version of The Office." And
that sounds like Pierre, yes.
Yeah, and I just said, Pierre, I don't think we can do that. Like we decided to not focus on one particular show. You know, we're gonna maybe go from decade to decade, talk about different TV shows and different decades and how they reflected the politics and the society there. And we just don't have 30 minutes to do, you know, about the French office. And he threw kind of a fit and basically said that, well, then we can do it without him. And I was like, oh no, wait. I mean, that's not even really a threat at this point.
Yeah, he gets sensitive over the oddest things. I don't know.
He's proud, you know what I mean? And he's proud of where he's from, which is great, which is good. But you know, like, come on, man, nobody wants to hear about. I don't know if people in France want to hear 30 minutes on the French office, do they?
Well, I wouldn't know. We'd have to ask him, except he's not here.
Oh shit, yeah.
I didn't know there was a French version of The Office. How many versions of The Office are there?
I don't know exactly how many there are, but I know that there are several international versions. And obviously there's the American version, the original UK version. Obviously, apparently there's a French version. I found out just a couple weeks ago, I did a video about The Office, and somebody left a comment saying I should check out the Belgian version. So there's also at least a Belgian version as well. So
maybe there's a Chinese version, and whenever everybody on the show is very positive about the company they work for, because when they say anything negative, they disappear.
Yeah, it's about a great boss and a bunch of loyal, grateful workers working an awesome job.
That would just be the way, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because I imagine it's one of those things that has to be changed a bit for each market it's in. There's a reason they don't just take the show and redub it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think that the first season of the American one sort of suffers in comparison. It definitely suffers in comparison to the British version, because I think the British version is genius. And it also suffers to comparisons to the later years of the American version, because the show got a whole lot better after that first season. And I think one of the reasons that it got better was they stopped trying to adapt things from the British version and just started to go off in their own direction. Because like the pilot episode of the American version is a very, very mild rewrite of the pilot episode of the British. Like, it's almost the exact same episode, and it just doesn't play nearly as well, you know. Like, the American sensibility just doesn't fit that.
Well, you have to adjust, when you're doing a new show, take some time to figure out what you're doing. So first seasons are often a bit rough. And if the show goes long enough, it starts to wear pretty thin near the end, usually with major cast changes.
Yeah.
And the premise, if the show is building toward a certain premise, either they've lost that thread, or viewers are tired of waiting for them to resolve the same question after 8 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the case of the American Office, it's like the lead character leaves in season 7, and the show goes on for 2 more years. And I mean, it has its moments after that, but it's just like the example I always use for stuff like that is Twin Peaks continuing to go after they solve the murder of Laura Palmer, and they try to build like new mysteries or new sort of ongoing stories, but none of them are quite as compelling. So the show ends up being, well, the whole purpose of the show has been resolved, so now we're just kind of hanging out with the characters. You know, and it's like, okay, I like the characters, but I mean, why are we just hanging out with them? Like, why are we still watching this? The story is over. We the show should be over, you know.
Yeah, but that's when the money overtakes the entertainment value.
Yeah.
So this actually ties with what we're talking about today.
It does.
Right? I figured that we've done some very heavy topics recently. We tried to do something a little bit more lighthearted or a little bit less intense this time. So going with entertainment and television and how shows, not individual shows necessarily, but television in general, changes over time to be a reflection of the era that it's created in.
Right. Yeah, but don't worry, everybody. We're still going to ruin this too, with our political bullshit. Can't I just watch a TV show? Why do you have to get all political with it? Anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, and you watch older shows, and it's some of it can almost be comical how much things have changed as far as not just subject matter, but even production values.
For real.
I have the feeling that we're going to come back to Star Trek a lot in this, and Star Trek has been in intermittent production for over 50 years. And, you know, the original show with the, paper mache rocks and things that are, like, you throw somebody against a ship's bulkhead and the entire bulkhead shakes.
Yes. Because it's a spaceship. That's how spaceships are built.
Very rickety.
Yeah.
Yes. But, and then and things that were potentially progressive at the time now look either comical or heavy-handed or just plain absurd. Like, you were trying, but you really shouldn't have, based on how it turned out. So. Yeah,
you had a good idea, but it just didn't come across, or maybe it came across better at the time. Now, looking back on it 50 years later, you're sort of like, okay, I see where their heart was in the right place, but they kind of missed that one, you know?
Yeah, they. I guess. I don't know, if we're going to talk about television being a reflection of its era, I guess you start with, like, the first hit show ever, which I would go with I Love Lucy for that.
Yeah.
Which I admit I have not watched a whole lot of, but I guess it was, sort of setting the template and that in many ways is still followed today. And much of it is not, it really doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's just meant to be funny and entertaining.
Yeah.
But there's not a whole lot to it. It's vacuous entertainment.
Yeah, but I will say this, and maybe this is a point that we'll make a couple of times during this discussion, is that, and that was something that Lucille Ball used to brag about. That I Love Lucy. It wasn't a political show. We weren't trying to change the world. We were just trying to make people laugh, right? And that's fair. That's fine if that's what you want to do. And it's a brilliant show. And
there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not what everyone is doing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it.
But that doesn't mean that it's apolitical. It's fair to say, as the creator, well, I wasn't trying to send any conscious political messages, but it was still made in a political context. And I think you can still find political content in the show, even if it wasn't intended or it wasn't part of a willful message that the show was trying to send. I mean, just the mere fact that the show existed and it had not only a female lead who was a very strong character and was the sort of the center of the show, but also that she was married to a man who was an immigrant, who was not an American or not a natural-born American, who was Cuban, who spoke Spanish frequently in the show. That maybe they didn't mean that as a political statement, but I think that is in its own way in the United States in the 1950s for the #1 TV show to be headed by a woman and the second lead is her husband who is a Cuban immigrant. Like that's not an apolitical thing.
The terrible thing is you could replace 1950s with 2018 in that sentence and it still holds.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, she's married to an immigrant. That's kind of radical, huh?
But this is, as you're saying, I mean, it's not something where they were trying to be actively political, but politics can come across just in what you do and what you accept as standard.
Yeah.
It's not something where it's not something they went out of the way to draw attention to it or have an episode where neighbors complaining about it or anything like that.
No,
they're not making it a focal point of the show, but just its presence carry some weight and some messaging with it.
Yeah, just like the presence of the implied spousal abuse, which is one of the. I mean, it was always played for laughs. It was never like presented as a serious dark topic, but if you sort of peek behind the joke, I mean, there are multiple instances in the show where Lucy does something zany and then she expresses fear that Ricky will hit her as a result of it. And there was even there was at least one episode where he spanks her, and again, it's played for laughs, like it's done very clownishly and cartoonishly, and she's, he's going like, Lucy, and she's like, ah, like it's played very cartoony. But still, like that, it's a husband hitting his wife, and so like that's in there. They didn't mean to send any message with that. I don't think they meant to say this is good. Husbands should be allowed to hit their wives, but that's what they showed. That's part of the content of the series, and I think it's fair game to notice that.
And I guess because to some extent that was a bit more acceptable just in the culture. I mean, you see that even with the. You see pictures of you see galleries online of like advertisements from the past that you look at and you go, there's no way that would make it past the drawing board today.
No.
With some of the sexism or the racism or things that appear in some of those advertisements. These are things that are not acceptable today that were a lot more commonplace and a lot more accepted at the time.
Oh God, yeah. Some of those old cigarette ads. Or really anything. I mean, there were some cigarette ads where it's like, if you get home and she won't stop running her mouth and you need to relax, it's like, have a smoke. You're like, oh, Jesus.
There was like a beer print advertisement for beer with like smoke coming up from the stove, and the husband's like, it's okay, honey, at least you didn't burn the beer.
Yeah. Like, oh, that's okay. If you hate your wife, this is the beer for you.
Yeah. And it wasn't just I Love Lucy. I mean, one of these days to the moon, Alice.
Oh yeah, good one. Yeah. And again, like a show that wasn't intended to be political. That was just Jackie Gleason just wanted to make a funny show, but But
I mean, that was always played for big laughs. I mean, that had the huge cheer and the laugh track and all. But still, that's threat of violence.
Yeah. And it tells you something not only about the show and about the TV at the time, but of course it tells you something about American society. That could be presented and that it would get laughs and applause. That a guy, the lead character, the protagonist of the show, the guy we're supposed to be on his side, threatens to punch his wife in the face. And everybody's like, ah, yeah. You tell her, Ralph. Like, whew. Thank goodness times have changed somewhat. We don't.
Yeah, somewhat.
We don't. We now at least we pretend to not be on board with it.
Yeah, you go through the motions. You pretend that it bothers you, and then you're generally okay. And you just, as long as it doesn't become a PR problem, you just let it slide.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that actually we can segue from the 50s to the 60s because there's actually a really good bridge between those two, because while I think it's fair to say that most TV, and certainly the most popular TV shows like Honeymooners and I Love Lucy and Donna Reed Show and other, like they didn't have a lot of intentional political messaging. They were mostly just intended to entertain. There were
even if you weren't allowed to show a married couple in the same bed because the actor and actress weren't married.
Right, which again, like that's on screen. That's part of the content of the show. Like that tells you something.
Married couples sleeping in separate beds.
Yeah.
That says something about cultural mores at the time, how people were interpreting that, what you could and couldn't do on TV.
Yeah, and it's like, how did Lucy get pregnant?
She wasn't even allowed to use the word pregnant.
No.
They'd use expecting or other terms, but they were explicitly forbidden from using the word pregnant.
Yeah. She's expecting. Yeah. We're having a baby.
I'm surprised that the episode didn't have come in with an actual stork.
Yeah. Ricky, look, it's a boy. Why did he deliver my baby to Fred? Lucy.
See, you keep doing the impersonations, and I'll just sit here and say, well, that's not great, but it's better than I could do, so I'm just going to let you roll.
That is probably what that is my best impression of Eddie Murphy's impression of Ricky. But anyway, there were.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's that's the show. Like, I mean, um, that's what we do. But
feel free to interrupt me sometimes to try to even the score out a bit.
I'll try to remember that. Shut up. Hey, shut the fuck up and let me finish my sentence. No, there were shows. Some of the best.
To the moon, Christopher.
Some of the best shows of the 50s, to my taste, and certainly some of the most meaningful to me, were the live or the live to tape dramas like Playhouse 90 and Studio One, where they would present. They were basically live or live to tape plays that were presented on sound stages and were either recorded and broadcast with minimal or no editing, or they were actually broadcast live to viewers at the time. And not every production was didactic or political. A lot of times they staged very, very edited productions of Shakespeare plays or other popular American dramas. But sometimes, like, that's where the Studio One and Playhouse 90 were the first major TV writing credits for Rod Serling. And some of Rod's stuff that he wrote for those shows was not overtly political. Like his most famous is probably Requiem for a Heavyweight, which is not necessarily like a heavy-handed message movie. But he also wrote things like Arena, which was very political, and his desire to be able to tell political stories, but to tell them in a way that would get past the network censors a little more easily is the reason that he wanted to create the Twilight Zone. And that, I think that's a good bridge into the 1960s, because Twilight Zone's first season starts in 59 and carries through to the early 60s.
And that's, I guess this is, Twilight Zone was one of the points where people have been making television for a while, and we're starting to realize that this was a medium that was not a flash in the pan. It's becoming more popular, was getting into more households, and you had the ability to reach more people with it. And so some people, like Rod Serling and others, started to realize that they could do things with more, not necessarily more political, but things of more import, to actually have messages, that this didn't have to be just vacuous, disposable entertainment, that you could actually say something and make, present messages through television and reach a lot more people than you could with in a movie theater with a book.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, in addition to Rod Serling, I think that probably the three biggest writers of that era of American television that cut their teeth on those live broadcasts was Rod Serling, and then also Reginald Rose, who is best known for writing 12 Angry Men, and also Paddy Chayefsky, who eventually wrote Network. And they were three of the most celebrated screenwriters, whether it's for television or for film, of their generation, and they all started in that early live TV format. And very much so, they realized that they didn't just have to write easily digestible entertainment. They could try to make a more significant, serious statement, because people realized this TV thing isn't going away. It's not just, we shouldn't treat it like a fad. We should, if we have something to say, we should try to use it to say something,
Right. And you're talking about some of the shows with minimal editing. Part of the reason for that was just the technology that was available.
Yeah. That
everything was being recorded directly to tape. And if you wanted to edit something, you would have to go into the tape and physically cut it out.
Exactly.
And that became complicated to do stuff like that. So many shows in that era were recorded in order in a single day, because that was what they were able to do. Like when the original Doctor Who premiered in 1963, and those episodes were basically filmed in order without cuts, because there was no other way to do it.
Yeah.
That's why some of those early shows, with the production values being different, you'll see people just blow a line sky high and then correct it, or they'll one of the other actors will step in and try to smooth it over, and they'll just keep going, because effort to go in and cut the tape and edit it and get it to the right length and so on was a lot more effort than they were willing to do for simply screwing up a single line. Whereas now you take 15 takes and 14 of them are perfect, and you agonize over which one to use.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, well, the people don't realize, and some people might know this. It's not like a secret, but the concept of video assist, where a film director would have a video camera recording the take that they were also filming at the same time, so that they could go back and review it immediately, instead of having, I mean, before that you had to wait till the end of the day when you got the rushes back, where you got to see everything you filmed that day. You wouldn't even know, you could have what you thought was a good take, and it turned out to be you couldn't use it because the camera position was wrong or the focus was off, and for something like that, like, we take that for granted now, but it just wasn't an option. It's one of the reasons why they filmed I Love Lucy. I Love Lucy was actually recorded on film, not only because it had higher quality and they knew that it would last longer and they could make money in reruns and the show would live beyond its original run, but also if they did need to do an edit, film editing was at that point was a lot easier than video editing.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, with when Doctor Who's 50th anniversary came, when they did the film about the like sort of a biopic about William Hart at the beginning of the show, and they have one thing where they're showing the troubles they had with production, and the way they filmed, I mean, they had multiple cameras going at once, and in the booth they were switching which camera's feed was going onto the master film, and they're in the control room and they're hissing, we have to do this, we can't cut, we've already cut 3 times. They're doing a half-hour episode and they've had 3 cuts, and that's out of control. Wow, yeah, it's because that was what they had. That was the technology, and that's part of the reason why you watch shows from that long ago and it's almost laughable how what the production looks like, but it's because that was the best they could do with the technology they had at the time. Yeah. Well, Doctor Who is actually kind of is a good example of something to do with the shows reflecting the times, because I'm not an expert on it, but I believe that when Doctor Who first started, it was intended to be sort of an educational show for kids. And then they realized that, like, the sci-fi stuff was what got people to watch, and it sort of transitioned from an educational show into more of a broader, popular sci-fi format, because they realized that's what people want to see. They don't want to see adventures in history. They want to see, like, Doctor Who fight the Daleks. Right. And here's another thing about how shows are affected by the culture at the time. When the show premiered, the Doctor was played by William Hartnell, who was in like his 50s or 60s at that point, and there was a younger character played by, I believe it was Carol Ann Ford, who went by the name Susan Foreman, and they decided to make Susan the Doctor's granddaughter simply because the idea of a man and a woman of that different of ages traveling together was concerning, and so they wanted to make her a relative to eliminate that possibility in people's minds. And that is the only reason that the Doctor has ever had any relative on the show in 50-some years, because the television and culture being what it was at the time, that was a concern, and they made her a relative to try to deal with the possible feedback from the culture at the time. Wow. Well, it's just like that's the reason they introduced Aunt Harriet into the Batman comics. Because of the Frederick Wortham thing, where people said, like, hey, wait a minute, why is this grown man and this teenage boy living together by themselves, and the only other person in the house is Alfred, who is also a middle-aged man. So, they bring in Aunt Harriet to be like, okay, look, see, everything's fine now, they're a family, you perverts. Was she in the comic, or was she introduced for the TV show? No, she was in the comic. She was in the comic first? She started in the comic, yeah, and then they brought her into the TV show, yeah. She was also in the comic. She didn't last real long, but yeah, she was in the comic. Go figure. Yeah, well, because actually, I think, originally in the 50s, it might have been the early 60s, they killed off Alfred in the Batman comics, and one of the reasons was that they three men living together alone in a house, like, ooh, like the prurient imaginations that they imagined people, coming to all of these conclusions. Isn't it wonderful that the people who come to these appalling conclusions are the ones who are supposedly the most against it? It's like nobody else. This wouldn't even occur to anyone else. Yeah, it's like I didn't
I didn't get that at all. What? That's what you saw when you read the book? Okay. Wow. Don't show him Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman in the 40s was like Bondage City. Don't read Wonder Woman.
And that was by design.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was intentional. It was very intentional. But yeah,
that Wonder Woman lost her powers if her arms were bound by a man.
Yeah. And actually that, speaking of things, maybe the creator's heart was in the right place, but just getting the delivery of the message way wrong. I think those early Wonder Woman comics are a good example of that, because I think the creator, I mean, his intention was to show a strong female character, and I believe for by the standards of the time, he was considered rather progressive and feminist. But when you look back on it now, it's like, wow, it doesn't read that way today at all.
No. But then going forward a little bit, another show that I think that we're going to, we can talk about Doctor Who because of the long run of it and how that's changed over time.
Yeah, for sure.
Because actually there was a throwaway thing with in the recent Christmas special where one of the most recent Doctors met the first Doctor. William Hartnell was long since passed away, but they recast. But there was a line where somebody had called the Doctor like a stupid ass, and the first Doctor pops his head into the room and says something to the effect of, if I hear more language like that, somebody's going to get a swatted bottom. He goes back in, and the current Doctor is mortified. And people are like, that's ridiculous. That's not the way the first Doctor was. But then somebody pulled up a clip from the original series where he threatened to spank his own granddaughter. Things have changed over time, and they made a whole point of bringing that up and sort of saying, this is not going to cut it now. At one point, the current Doctor is like, please, please, please stop saying things like that. You can't keep saying things like that. It's like, says who? Goes, well, pretty much everyone you're going to meet for the rest of your life. They brought some attention to how things have changed over time, trying not to make it ridiculous, but at the same time, it's sort of an acknowledgement of how much the character has changed as times have changed.
Yeah, and certainly it's much more preferable to handle it that way than to handle it the way, say, The Simpsons handled the Apu situation, where they basically just had Marge and Lisa turn to the camera and go, look, just don't worry about it. It's like, oh, okay, good. As long as you're taking it seriously.
I didn't see the clips of that, but I heard a lot of negative things, so I don't think anyone was happy with how they handled that.
No, it would have been better if they had just said nothing at all, honestly. If that was
another sign the show just needs to go away now.
Yeah.
It's like, 30 years? I mean, okay. You've had a great run, and then you went for, that long again. Stop.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll probably get to The Simpsons in a minute when we get to the 90s, but
or the 80s.
Yeah, that's true. They started in '89. That was the Christmas special. Yeah.
But then the other show that I think we're going to end up talking about a bit in here, how it's changed over time, simply because it's another one's been in intermittent production for that long, is Star Trek, which is not by design when we did this, because I know we always go on about Star Trek, but that show is another one that has changed a huge amount over time, just as the world has changed around it.
Definitely.
But Star Trek, I mean, even before we get to that, I mean, weren't there some other groundbreaking shows in the 60s that came along before that were a bit more overtly political? Was that... Because I'm not sure what's in the 60s and what's in the 70s, like All in the Family and Smothers Brothers and things like that.
Well, Smothers Brothers started in the 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Late 60s?
Yeah, late 60s. All in the Family started in 69, I think.
All right, so it's essentially
it's a 70s show, basically. But yeah, Smothers Brothers was 60s. And I mean, it depends on how you, like Dragnet, the sort of revival. Dragnet originally was in the 50s and early 60s, and then it came back, and the version that most people today know better, because it's the version they always showed on TV Land, the color episodes with Jack Webb and Harry Morgan. They came in the mid 60s, and some of those were very sort of heavy-handed and political, especially the LSD episode, which everybody remembers, sort of,
the anti-drug episodes, or some marijuana. I mean, they're famous for that show is famous for how deadpan and dry and emotionless they all were with everything.
Yeah. And how they sort of like, especially with the anti-drug episode, it was a very flat, simple explanation or solution to the problem that was offered. You know, it's like, these young people just need to stop doing these drugs. It's like, oh, okay, thanks, Jack. You solved that problem for us.
Yeah. We've got people around here who are depressed. Well, these people just need to cheer up.
Exactly. Get a hobby.
Yeah, but Dragnet, I mean, that's a show. A lot of it was entertainment, but there were attempts to try to do political things, to actually send a good message. How well they did at it, obviously, is up for debate. But you know, people's hearts were in the right place.
Yeah, and I think there were a lot of shows in that time period in the 60s that, like Dragnet, or also another example might be something like Gunsmoke, which for the most part was not political at all and didn't really try to be. But every once in a while you would see a Gunsmoke where, at least in terms of the theme of the episode, you could read it as having a relevant political message, where the episode might be about, you know, someone who was new in town, a stranger who was new in town, who was being unfairly treated, who was being mistrusted for no good reason, just because they were new in town and everybody assumed the worst of them. You know, there's things like that that would find their way into the show, that you could easily read them and not take a political message from it, but also clearly there's some relevant, you know, political content there if you want to look for it.
And a lot of this came about, a lot of the political content on TV came about as politics were exploding, sometimes literally, in the American culture at that point, because in the late 60s, you know, we're after the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War was getting into full swing, and there were a lot of protests and counter-protests, and whatever unity that had, or veneer of unity that had existed previously was pretty much dust at that point.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that started coming across in different things on television. And again, some of it worked well and some of it didn't. And you had, you know, the racial issues. I mean, you did the thing recently with the Star Trek episode, Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, with the black-white aliens and the white-black aliens. Yeah. Where the left half of the face is white versus the right half of the face being white, and how they're arch nemesis and hate each other. It's, instead of blacks and whites, it's black whites and white blacks. And the network censors it. Vrow.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Vrow.
Yeah.
But you know, so, but a lot of the problem, I think, with some of those episodes being so heavy-handed was that they were the first people who were doing things like that, and there wasn't a good track record to figure out what worked and what didn't.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, and also I think the thing that you can sort of use Star Trek for, because it has been made and remade so many times over the last 50 plus years, you can see how whatever the present concept of what is progressive changes, because Star Trek, the original Star Trek, for its time, for the United States in the mid to late 60s, was pretty progressive. It's not as progressive by our standards today, because yes, it did have a black woman in a major role. It did have a man of Japanese heritage in a major role. It did have a Russian character in a major role at a time when the Cold War was still very much in everybody's minds. But it was also led by 3 white actors, or actors who were perceived as white. You know, so we can say, like, okay, yeah, they put some people of color and some people who represented different nationalities in there, but it was still mostly a white person's show. And then as we get into, you know, the next generation, it's like, okay, the cast is a little more racially diverse. There are more women in the cast. Deep Space Nine, it goes even further than that. Voyager, for all of its faults and flaws, had probably the most racially diverse cast of the entire franchise, which I think is a very laudable thing. And then you know, we get to Discovery as well, and Enterprise. Like, the standard for what do we have to do this time to maintain the Star Trek tradition of having a diverse cast and, you know, making a very progressive, inclusive show. It's different each generation. You can't just keep doing what they did in the 60s, because society moves on. You have to keep pushing forward.
In fact, an example of how much things can change, one time back when I still had cable, VH1 was running something about, like, controversial moments in music history or music television history or things like that. And there was one with that they were showing this clip, and they said there was a lot of issues over this, and I honestly had no idea what it was. It was what's his name? Belafonte and Petula Clark were singing a duet on television,
Okay.
and they had until the narrator explained what the issue was. I had no idea. They're doing this duet, and he had his hand on her arm, and a black man with his hand on a white woman's arm was apparently a big deal in some areas of the country, and it was apparently a huge issue, and some networks were threatened not to air it, and different affiliates. And I'm watching this and I'm like, what?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think that there's obviously a lot of racial issues still, and
Certainly.
we're more aware of them. We haven't solved a whole lot of them, but the fact that I could watch that clip and not have the slightest clue what the issue was, I thought was actually a sign that there has been some progress along the way. But
for sure.
It blew me away that this was this huge controversial issue in some quarters, and watching it now, I had to have it explained to me because I had absolutely no comprehension of what the issue was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you have to put it in context of, I mean, think about what was it, in the 50s when Emmett Till was murdered. He was murdered for allegedly whistling at a white woman, which apparently he didn't even do. But that was the justification for the crime, is that, well, he whistled at a white woman. So yeah, it doesn't really
deserving of summary execution.
Yeah, exactly. So in that context,
so was registering black people to vote.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, in that context, you can understand why. Okay, of course, some people in certain parts of the country threw a fit over the sight of a black man on TV putting his hand on a white woman because they were so racist that the idea, even if they didn't personally approve of it themselves, the idea of a black teenager being lynched for whistling at a white woman was understandable to them. Like, they could comprehend that. That made sense to them. Like, oh, sure, well, that's probably why they did it. It's like for people.
That's a rational motivation for murder.
Yeah. Even if you think, well, they probably shouldn't have done that, but but it makes sense to you. Like, well, there you go. There's the reason. I mean, for someone like me, or most people from our modern age, even most racist people from our modern era, would probably look at that and go, I don't think so. You probably shouldn't kill people for whistling. That's the mark of progress. Even the racists are mostly like, whistling's not enough.
How pathetic is it that we have to state that explicitly?
Oh, well, yeah.
But yeah, so in the 60s, the nation was sort of coming apart, and you have shows like Star Trek that are trying to show that we've got a good future, that we'll get this sorted out, that we will learn to get along with each other. And then as we get into as we start to get into the 70s, we get a bit more explicit with modern era, and you've I know seen more of the show than I have, but I think All of the Family was one of the very groundbreaking shows of this era for dealing with actual issues.
All in the Family, in many ways, plays as groundbreaking today, and it's almost 50 years old. I mean, there are episodes of All in the Family that were made in the early 70s that if they were brand new and aired on network TV today, it would be striking. Like, you would think, wow, that took guts. I mean, there were episodes of that show where, I mean, and the other thing is, it was at its best during its peak creative years. It was also genuinely a hilarious show. I mean, it mixed this incredibly serious and very earnest, very liberal political messaging with very, very effective comedy, like few, if any, shows have ever done. That was the real magic of it. But yeah, I mean, you had like the lead character was a racist white guy. And the premise of the show for its first, for its best years was the racist white guy argues with his liberal college student, war protester son-in-law. And we're usually supposed to be on the side of the son-in-law, but it's like it's dramatizing this generational conflict where the children are coming to regard their parents as being behind the times, and in many cases as being racist, and are calling them out on it, and are trying to push things forward in a way that the parents don't approve of. And again, just even watching it today, it would be wonderful to see more, especially more mainstream network shows that had that kind of guts to be that overtly political, because it just doesn't happen as often.
No, because now you're worried about advertiser revenue.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in the 80s, Quantum Leap, yeah, hard to believe
Yeah.
the Quantum Leap has been off the air for 25 years, isn't it?
Oh my God. Yeah. I guess
But
what 90 was 93, 94 was that?
93,
Yeah.
93,
That was the
last
last
episode of
year.
93. Yeah, 92, 93.
Wow.
But we're jumping ahead a little bit here. But I remember when they did an episode where Sam leaped into somebody who was in the military who may or may not have been gay, and they never made it clear one way or the other.
Yeah.
But they did the episode, and I remember that at the end, Al was asking Sam, there's one thing I just don't get. I don't understand. Was he gay? And Sam goes, does it matter? And
Yeah.
Al sort of nods because he's made some progress in that episode on that front. And the episode ends, and like a week later, it was in the newspaper that some advertiser pulled like $300,000 or $400,000 of advertising from Quantum Leap because of that episode, and that they didn't want to be perceived as supporting the gay lifestyle or the concept of gays in the military. And that was, like 1990.
Yeah, and it goes. I mean, if you watch that episode, I mean, it's a little bit like kind of a Star Trek situation where you can see, their hearts are clearly in the right place, and the overall message is very good. If that episode were made today, some things might be a little different. But yeah, I mean, it's the basic message of the show is, gay people are people too. And they deserve to be treated with basic respect. And to think that, advertisers would flee the show as a result of that, when they even, like you said, they even took pains to stop short of saying definitively that the guy Sam leaped into was actually gay. Mm-hmm. But just the suggestion that we should be tolerant and accepting of gay people was enough for there to be a minor advertiser revolt.
Yeah. And along with All in the Family, around 1970, there's another, like, you've seen and think, very highly of All in the Family. You don't think as much of this other show and as highly of it, but MASH came out at the same time, 1970, and the show was a bit more progressive than the movie was, which we won't get into all of that right now. But what was really striking about MASH at that time is that the Vietnam War was escalating. It was nearing, I guess America got out of it in like the early 70s, but at the time that this show premiered, the Vietnam War was in the news. It was a huge thing. I mean, it was dominating American political discourse, and MASH came along, and here was this show created by the same generation that was giving us and promoting the Vietnam War, and the fundamental concept of the show was to demonstrate the waste of war. It took place in the Korean War, and it was unapologetically an anti-war show airing during the height of America's involvement in Vietnam. And it said, like many shows, at the very beginning, it could be kind of heavy-handed, kind of preachy, but it found its voice, it found its stride, and it really was a groundbreaking show in political commentary, in how it approached certain issues, and just taking real-life stories and putting them almost directly into the show. I'll admit, I'd seen a huge number of the episodes in syndication, but when I guess there was like some deal on Amazon or something, my parents got like the full box set with the movie and the complete series.
Oh yeah.
And there were some first season episodes that I had never seen before, because they apparently didn't make it into syndication because they addressed some of these issues very head on and very explicitly in a way that I guess made some people uncomfortable. Because apparently there's an episode about keeping, like, her hiring Korean housekeepers and sort of keeping them almost as slaves, and American soldiers were doing this.
Oh,
and
wow.
it was addressed, but in the way that they could, in 1970. But at the same time, that's not the sort of thing that I guess they were very comfortable with showing in syndication. There was another one, I guess it was inspired by, wasn't via the My Lai Massacre, was it called?
The My Lai Massacre, yeah.
My Lai, yeah. And there was something that was similar, that was talked about, similar to that. They would create parallel situations in the Korean War, and that was a fairly gutsy thing to do at that point.
Definitely.
It was a show it's a show that you look at it now and certain things are a bit quaint, or you would do certain things differently, but they're a show that, and they got very heavy-handed in the last season or two as well when the well was running dry. But it's another show that was that really had its heart in the right place from beginning to end.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I have to say, even though I haven't seen as much of it, and I'm not necessarily like as huge of a fan of it, as some people are, the central trick of the show to set the series in Korea, but to make it about Vietnam is just brilliant. You know, because it's a bit like, it's just like how they did in the political episodes of Star Trek, or the political or sort of social message episodes of The Twilight Zone, where you create just a little bit of separation, where you can plausibly say, oh no, don't worry, no, this isn't about Vietnam, this is about Korea. But obviously it's about Vietnam, you know. So yeah, I think that's just genius.
And the last episode aired in like 82 or 83,
yeah.
And it was the final, like they did a short season, they did a 2.5-hour final movie. Like, what kind of sitcom gets a 2.5-hour finale?
Oh yeah. And it was the #1 rated show ever.
Yeah, for decades.
Yeah,
I think it got beaten by like a Super Bowl or something weird like that.
Probably, yeah.
Or the 9/11 coverage, because I think everyone was watching that.
Yeah.
But the last episode, and they actually went a little bit longer than they meant to, because they had to move to a different location, because as they were filming the finale, brush fires in the area forced them to move somewhere else.
Wow.
So they had to write in a whole scene with fires approaching, and they all move, and they have a different place, and there's, yeah. Anyway, near the end, when the characters know the war is running down and coming to an end, and they're talking about different things, and one of them mentions that there's, you know, escalating problems in Vietnam, and another character goes, "Where's Vietnam? Never heard of it."
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's and I think also, you know, a lot of people have commented that the show itself ran something like twice as long as the actual Korean War lasted.
Oh,
so,
much longer.
It was,
the show went 11 seasons, and the Korean War lasted about 3.
Yeah, so it was like 4 times as long as the actual war. Yeah.
Well, MASH had better writers.
Those writers in Korea were just shit. I mean, they couldn't even come up with a good ending. Yeah, so now we're into the 80s. And what can we talk about in the 80s? There's
Well, the 80s became an era where people stopped caring. This is when Reaganomics came along, and the whole trickle-down economics theory, which we're still suffering from. And there was a lot, like Dave Barry, when he wrote the book Dave Barry Turns 50, and he was doing a year-by-year thing, you know, summaries of things that were going on years when he was growing up. He stopped at a certain point and said that you know, like, you look at the difference between certain years and, like, this, you know, how different things were in a short period of time as Vietnam was escalating, and you know, the difference between 62 and 65 in America, how much things change. He goes, what's the difference between 1983 and 1985? You know, it was an era where there's very little awareness of what was happening. You know, not a lot of progress was being made. Things are getting rolled back. There wasn't a lot of social issues that people were engaged in, so people sort of disengaged from politics, which was kind of a problem. And then in the 80s, 90s, Seinfeld came along and was the show about nothing in the decade about nothing. Yeah.
Well, and you know, there's another phenomenon in TV in the 80s that was mostly a sitcom thing, but it also sort of.
Are you talking about the very special episode?
I am talking about the very special episode. I'm talking about the episode where usually fluffy, unserious shows would pretend to be All in the Family for 1 week and do like a super serious show. Where sometimes there were barely even jokes. Like, it was just like, probably the most famous / infamous example was the Different Strokes episode, where they had, I think it was Gordon Jump playing the child molester who tried to abuse Arnold and his friend. And it's just, you watch that today, and it's, you know, they're talking about a very serious issue, and they're trying to do it very earnestly and very, you know, sincerely, but it's kind of jarring, because you're like, this is Different Strokes. This is not, you know, next week it's going to be about, you know, Arnold saving up to get a new bike. You know what I mean? Like this. But I made a video about very special episodes a few months ago, and I mean, overall, even though I don't think they made very good television most of the time, I do appreciate them, and I do think they were a net good, because so much of TV in the 80s was frivolous and you know, not engaging with serious topics, the fact that there were episodes every once in a while of your favorite silly show, you know, okay, you watch Mr. Belvedere and all of a sudden there's a rape episode, you know, it's jarring.
I shouldn't laugh. Laugh. The contrast when you're doing fluffy, vacuous TV, and then suddenly you do an episode about sex crimes.
Yeah.
Like your CSI or something.
But it puts that information in your head. It raises that awareness, you know. And I can say, speaking personally, as a young person in the 80s and in the early 90s who was watching these shows, like, it left an impression on me because I wasn't watching them as a TV critic. I wasn't looking at them like the way I might be able to look at them now and say, well, I really appreciate the message, but as a piece of writing, as a piece of drama or comedy, it just doesn't work. But the message itself was received and was very much appreciated.
And the show, those episodes were so different from the standard that it would really stand out and stick in your mind. It's using a somewhat absurd example to compare it to, people still talk about 1 week of Garfield comics where he got kind of serious and Garfield was like waking up and the house was abandoned, there was no John, and peeked out the door and the windows are boarded up and there's a for sale sign on the lawn. And it was only a 1 week thing, and that was like 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's still talked about because like the only time that in the last 25, 30 years that Garfield has done anything even remotely different.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think the next week was the strip where John drank semen.
That one, that was a joke that got in there at one point too. Not explicitly as such,
no.
But close enough.
And then Jim Davis still denies. He still says that wasn't the punchline, but like no other punchline makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, like that's got to be what it is. That's it. That's the joke. He drank cat semen. That's it, right?
Because he drank dog
semen.
Like you're gonna have a healthy litter of puppies.
Yeah.
Well, what else could that line mean?
Yeah, what? Explain the joke to me, Jim. What's the joke if he didn't drink semen?
Jim's like, how should I know? I haven't written the strip since 1983.
Ask the guy who writes it. I just cash the checks.
Yeah, the only interview that Bill Watterson ever did, he created Calvin and Hobbes. He did one interview for a magazine. He was asked about Garfield, and in one of the most beautifully political answers I think I've ever seen, Bill answered, Garfield is consistent.
Oh yeah, for the kind of people who like this thing, it's the kind of thing they'll like.
Exactly. Oh boy.
Well, you know, the 80s also saw the sort of the revival of the cop show. We saw the return of the gritty cop show with Hill Street Blues, which occasionally would touch on socially relevant issues.
So no more T.J. Hooker. Now we got Hill Street Blues. No, yeah. Another show that did the very heavy-handed, very special episodes during that era was MacGyver.
Oh, God bless MacGyver. Yeah, absolutely.
They meant so well. They tried so hard, and boy, did it show that they were trying hard. Yeah,
well, I know there's one episode of MacGyver in particular that it's one of those things where it's like, we're both huge MacGyver fans. I love MacGyver. I watch it.
The original, anyway. I haven't seen a single episode of the new.
I watched the first couple episodes of the new one, and it just wasn't for me. You know, I mean, I don't wish it any harm, but it just wasn't for me. The
reviews are uninspiring.
Yeah, it was. I was like, okay, good luck, you know. But yeah, the original MacGyver I absolutely love. It's one of my. I call it one of the best bad TV shows ever made.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've talked about this. When you go back and watch it, it's often fun. It's often entertaining. It's often not very good.
Yeah, but
and it had one of the most open-ended premises of any show because of where he worked for, and he could just anything. Like the famous example is where a woman who is pregnant finds out that her husband is actually working, like runs a halfway house, and finds out that he's working with the criminals, and she overhears something. So MacGyver is gassing up his Jeep when she comes running up and says, "My husband is trying to kill me. Get in!" And you have your episode.
That's the episode. That's one of my favorite episodes of the whole show. I love stories like that where the hero just kind of is minding his own business and he gets swept up in something, and that's the show. But there were many sort of very special episodes of MacGyver. A lot of them dealt with environmentalism, which was nice because that was a big issue in the 80s. And today, yeah, it's certainly a big issue today. But you know, it was very much a trendy issue at the time, and it was nice to have a relatively popular show talk about those kinds of things and to be unapologetically environmentalist, just like it was unapologetically in favor of gun control. Like they did gun control episodes where there was no gray area. I mean, the message of the show was, we need to impose stricter gun control. What the hell is wrong with you people? And that was it. You know, it wasn't trying to start a discussion. It was saying, this is nuts. We need to fix this.
And they also did their episodes with when they were running out of ideas, and they basically just took other shows or movies and did an episode. Like, one of my favorite episodes is called Honest Abe, which is basically the movie The In-Laws.
Yes.
With Peter Falk redone. They did their Andromeda Strain episode.
Oh, yeah, that's such a dark episode, too.
Yeah, they did an episode that was meant to basically be Buster Keaton comedies, where they actually have the house fall over with the open window over the person standing there.
Yeah, they did that exact gag. Yeah, exactly. They did a couple of Indiana Jones episodes. They did a couple of Indiana Jones episodes in the show, and then one of the TV movies that they did after it was canceled was kind of an Indiana Jones ripoff.
They even mentioned it's Holy Grail has been found. I've seen the movie.
Yeah,
and I think somebody pointed out one of their favorite scenes in the episode with that is when they end up pinned underneath a rock. And the clue to get out is written in like hieroglyphics on the rock, and they look at it with the flashlight, and it's like, yeah, because if you're in there with your torch, you're probably going to burn yourself to death or suffocate. But fortunately, they were prepared to write the clue in a way that people with flashlights would be able to figure it out.
In a few thousand years, people will have devices that. Well, you know, they're one of the things about very special episodes that we mentioned already is that, you know, the shift in tone can be very jarring if it's a mostly lighthearted show and then all of a sudden it gets super serious. And there are two examples of that. And the other example I'm going to mention I don't even think you would technically call it a very special episode. But the first one is there's a MacGyver episode that deals with racism. And I think it's the first episode that introduces the Challengers Club, which becomes sort of a recurring setting for MacGyver. It's like a halfway house or like, you know, like a teen shelter that he volunteers at a lot. Yeah. And in the first episode where that place is introduced, one of the founders of it, a man named Booker, who is a black man, is killed by a white supremacist. And
was that the first episode with the Challengers Club?
I think that was the first episode with the Challengers Club, yeah.
All right.
And the white supremacist who kills Booker, like MacGyver finally catches up to him and, you know, grabs him by the collar and he's like, Why did you do it? Yeah, why did you kill my friend? And the guy drops the N-word. You know, he says because he's an N-word, except he pronounces the N-word. And so like someone says the N-word on MacGyver and it's like, whoa. Wait a minute, I get where you were going, but...
And then MacGyver nearly caves his face in, as I recall.
MacGyver offers the proper response. He punches his lights out. You know, but like you don't expect to hear something so real and so ugly on MacGyver, even when it's dealing with a very serious topic. You're like, oh shit, some dude just said the N-word on MacGyver. And then the other example that I wanted to mention is the Nazi episode of Lois and Clark, where it's like it's the fluffy romantic Superman show, and then oh shit, swastikas. You know, like there's swastikas everywhere.
An idea that was later picked up by Star Trek Enterprise because people think that Aryan Nation is superior beings. Obviously, aliens would join forces with them.
Yeah, that's probably the funniest thing about that. It's like, so the aliens, they sided with the Nazis. Like, we want to be on these guys' side. Yeah.
But I wonder if those very special episodes were kind of blowback for how vacuous culture was becoming at that point.
Well, I think probably it was that, and I think in the minds of a lot of, especially like a lot of network executives, I think they viewed that as performative. I don't think they really cared one way or the other about the issues. I think probably the people making the shows, and certainly maybe the people writing the shows, cared to a certain degree and thought it was important, and thought it was worth doing. But the network executives were just like, well, let's do some of these because people watch them and it'll make us look good. It'll make us look like we're socially conscious and we're trying to give back to the community. But they didn't really care. It was performative activism, which is why it was just a one episode thing instead of producing shows that consistently dealt with these issues, you know?
Right. And since we're talking about things that, you know, changing over time, Star Trek came back in the 80s with The Next Generation. and the difference in tone between the two shows can be pretty striking at times. I mean,
Definitely.
The first show, the original show, was basically about Kirk and crew going around the Enterprise spreading truth, justice, and the American way.
Exactly.
Because we were in the era of American exceptionalism, and we were going to win in Vietnam, like the French couldn't, and so on.
Yeah.
And then you get to the next generation. It's a lot more tiptoeing around and being respectful of other people and not stepping on people's toes. And you can even tell the difference in the soundtrack, where like the episode of Classic Star Trek begins, and it begins with a cymbal crash and a brass band playing. And then you get to the next generation, and it begins with like 3 notes from a violin, real quiet.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Even the soundtrack is completely different. And the original show, they would just find random world, beam down, tell them about the universe at large, Starfleet, Klingons, Romulans, blah blah blah. The next generation did that for like the first season, and then by the 4th season they'd completely change it, and they announced that they didn't even visit planets until they were ready to enter space. We're going to find out about them anyway. And it's like, you just changed the entire premise of the show mid-flow. And the most incredible thing about it is that no one even noticed.
No.
I said they could do a Trek Actually video about how that was just a complete 180 on the very concept of the show, based on how we, as a culture, were taking a different approach to how we handled other people.
Yeah, and they never acknowledged it. They never, because the opening narration was always the same. To seek out new life and new civilizations, even though that was no longer the focus of the show at all, and wasn't for most of the run of Next Gen.
It had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
They'd explore weird spatial anomalies, but they didn't really go to other worlds too much. Since the classic Star Trek ended, the show that has been most faithful to the concept of exploring strange new worlds is Stargate SG-1.
Right. And that might actually be... That if anybody,
starring the same guy as MacGyver.
Yes, starring Richard Dean Anderson. Absolutely.
We're going to bring this in. We're going to tie this all together somehow.
Good for him getting another 7-season series.
That one went 10.
But
he was on for 7 or 8.
Yeah, I think he left. Yeah. But that might be an interesting premise for a Star Trek show. If anybody ever decides to do a Star Trek show that maybe tries to deconstruct some parts of the Star Trek concept and explore how complicated they are. Like, if you wanted to do a show that was actually about a ship that was on a mission to explore unexplored space, and do it in a way that would be acceptable and responsible. Because obviously there's really, if people live there, there's no such thing as unexplored space. It's just you haven't been there yet. So you're not really, you can't discover a place that people already live.
But, that's a mindset that we still don't grasp a lot of the time.
Yeah.
We talk about how people discovered America and populate. It's like, well, there were people here.
Yeah. How do you discover a populated continent?
Yeah. They're called Native Americans, and they're not allowed to vote because they can't prove their residence.
Yeah, because they're descended from people who were here before any of our ancestors were. That seems fair.
And then I guess television in a lot of ways now, because of the splintering of it's not controlled by networks anymore. You've got online, you've got Netflix, you've got Revivals, which is just trying to cash in on the shows that were around before.
Yeah.
But one thing that's become much bigger, starting with Babylon 5, I think was really the trailblazer on this, is serialized storytelling, which is kind of the era that we're in now. Every show, it used to be prime time where you were assuming that people wouldn't be able to watch every week, so you had a concept, and if people only saw like 6 out of 26 episodes in a season, everything will be right where they left it. It's a primetime directive. Leave everything how you found it.
Right.
And nothing ever changed. And that they've moved away from that in a lot of television, which is, I would argue, mostly a good thing.
Yeah.
But television, a lot of shows now don't just do an endless string of standalone episodes. They're serialized, and if you miss one episode, you could actually be in some trouble figuring out what's going on going forward.
Yeah. Well, because I think the creators found that the opposite of what they feared was true, which is if you build a show so that you have to watch every episode, if people like the show, they will watch every episode. Like it pulls them along. It's sort of a built-in hook. Instead of creating a show where every episode is an isolated sort of capsule, and it doesn't matter if you see every episode or not. If the episodes all connect and you watch one, and then you have to watch the next one and the next one and the next one to see how the story proceeds. You know, that's a hook. People will watch the show if they find it compelling.
And it's also a reward for people who pay attention, as opposed to just trying to make lowest common denominator that anybody can come in and watch.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to find a serialized storytelling on a show like The Dukes of Hazzard, but you know,
no.
You know, that one you can watch an episode in the first season, the 7th season, and you know, as long as you can shuffle those episodes into any order, and it would work just as well.
Yeah.
Coy and Vance notwithstanding. But,
yeah, that might be confusing. Wait, who are these guys?
Of course, the whole concept of that show is that they weren't allowed to leave Hazard County, Bo and Luke, because of their, like, I guess, moonshining conviction or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they decided to go off and join the NASCAR circuit.
Yeah. Never mind.
And they leave their car behind.
Yeah, you know, for their suspiciously similar cousins to come in and take over.
Who were so suspiciously similar that what they did was they took the scripts they'd written and they crossed out Bo and Luke and put in Coy and Vance, and bam, they had the new episodes. That's how stringent the storytelling was on that.
That's how they handled the departure of Chrissy in Three's Company. He's like, oh, okay, Cindy, yeah, fuck it, it's Cindy now.
Yeah, but Babylon 5 was one of the first shows that actually had a 5-year arc before it even started, and followed it through with a couple fits and starts because of certain problems. But they told the story, and it progressed over the full 5 years. And now a lot of shows do that. A lot of shows do at least the full season is a full arc.
Yeah.
Even the most recent Star Trek show, Discovery, their first season was a serialized story.
Very much.
If the first episode, if you watch like episodes 1 and 2, then you watch episode 8, you wouldn't have a clue what the hell was going on. Although you put an asterisk on that, because I think Discovery was pretty interesting in that they knew that they were doing the show in a different way on the streaming. So the first 2 episodes, essentially what would be the equivalent of a pilot episode, don't even take place on the same ship as the show. Discovery doesn't even show up until episode 3.
Right. It's almost like a prologue.
I thought was a very interesting choice.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. But I mean, even without taking that into account, it's a show that you have to watch every episode.
Yeah, and it's the first, like, Discovery was the first Star Trek show to really fully embrace that, and it's the first Star Trek series to be produced in the Netflix era, or even though the show doesn't, at least in the United States, the show doesn't air on Netflix, and even internationally where it is carried on Netflix, it's 1 episode per week. They don't put the whole thing up at once like most Netflix shows are, but it's designed to be a streaming show. It's designed to be bingeable. So the episodes are much more closely interconnected. Even a show like Deep Space Nine, which for its last couple seasons did a lot of very heavily serialized stories, the episodes are much more standalone than the Discovery episodes are. There was an ongoing story, but it wasn't strictly serialized. Right.
But Discovery is different, but I don't have a problem with that, because Deep Space Nine notwithstanding, Star Trek basically did the same show for 18 years.
Yeah.
They did The Next Generation, they did Voyager, and they did Enterprise, which are all essentially the same show, and people were sick of it by the end. So Discovery doing something different is good, because the show has to change to keep up with the times. And we're seeing television is a lot different than it used to be because of the markets, because of experience, what has already been done, trying to find new ground and do new things. And because audiences are a lot more open to certain things and a lot more closed-minded to others than they used to be.
Yeah, well, that's why you see something like a certain number of fans of Star Trek being unable or unwilling to accept the look of Discovery, because the show is set in the same time period as around the same time period as The Cage, the original pilot for Star Trek, about 10 years or so before the Captain Kirk era that we see in the classic series. But of course the aesthetic is completely different. Like it doesn't look like it's remotely the same place, but production value changes.
If they set it up to look like it did then, you'd think it looked comical.
Yeah, you can't.
You've got an entire wall of flashing random lights. Why don't you just put the reel-to-reel thing spinning randomly in the background too and be done with it?
Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't work. It doesn't match the expectations of a modern audience. It doesn't make sense. It's only reasonable to allow. And the other thing is, when it's fair to the creators of the show to allow them to make their show. You know,
Yes.
to not hamstring them and say, okay, you can make a Star Trek show, but it has to look like this because it has to match the other thing. Instead of hiring talented writers and producers and actors and designers and special effects artists and saying, you know what, you make this your show. You do this the way you think it should be done, and it will fit in because it's all make-believe anyway.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Hire the best people you can and say, now you need to very closely follow the script from 50 years ago.
Yes.
Because we don't want to step on anyone's toes from back.
Yeah, pretend that you're making this show in 1966.
It's like the whole Superman Lives thing with Kevin Smith. Why do you hire Kevin Smith to write a Superman movie and then tell him what to write? You know, if you're going to hire somebody because you think they understand the character, let them write their story.
Yeah, let him tell his story.
If Kevin Smith has written his own Superman movie, it probably would have sucked anyway. But
but it would have been his.
Yeah. But yeah, and that's the era we're in now as far as television goes, and it's reflection of the times. You know, it's you need to. Part of the thing with the serialized is that there's so many other so much competition even for television. And outside of television, the internet and so on, that the serialized is how you can get people to commit to something larger.
Oh, very much, yeah. And, you know, there's also, I think, the way in which modern TV shows, or I guess current TV shows, deal with political issues and social issues, it can be distinguished from the more kind of blatantly didactic things that we saw from things like Star Trek or All in the Family, where you could tell, like, okay, this is a message episode. You know, nowadays when shows do political or social commentary content, it's presented much more in the vein of, okay, we're not going to necessarily tell people what the message is, but we're going to make a show that is relevant. Where the characters are dealing with issues that real people are dealing with, and not necessarily put it so blatantly forward that you can't miss the intended message. The message is there, but it's carried through the experiences of the characters, through the themes, through things that happen to them and their reactions to things. And it's not so much, you know, putting words in the mouth of a character to have them speak the message to the viewers, like would have been done in, say, an episode of MacGyver, you know?
Yeah, it's there to be recognized, but the episode doesn't grab you by the front of the shirt and shake you violently and say, this is the message, this is the message.
Right, exactly.
So, have we gone far enough with this that we have to resort to the less exciting part of the 5 minutes of Trump? Or do we have any other wrap-up thoughts on this? Because I think we've covered, we've progressed pretty thoroughly through television eras and the eras we've created. And I think that went fairly well, but I'm not sure where else to go from here now that we're in the present. We can predict the future, but...
yeah, it'll be holograms. It'll be like the Hall of Presidents at Disneyland, but it'll be holograms, and it'll just be in your living room, and the presidents will just tell you what to think about things. Abraham Lincoln will be like, slavery was a bad idea. And you're like, thanks, Abe.
Now I'm gonna kill some vampires.
Yeah, go get him, Abe. Hey, strangle that Trump hologram while you're here.
The hologram of presidents. Yes.
Oh, I like that. The hologram of presidents. Yeah. I think you want to. I hate to say it. You want to just do the 5 minutes of Trump?
Well, we got to do it eventually. If we do it now, it's over with.
That's true. It's like you know, you're gonna have to go to the dentist eventually. Just
might as well go while you still have teeth.
Just rip the Band-Aid off. All right, let me get the timer up here. Okay, here we go. That you see, look at his hideous face. He just, oh God, what a contemptible human being in just every possible way.
It's even a gloriously sloppy font going with it.
Yeah. Well, sure. All right, let me start the timer, and then
we actually have the on-screen timer.
We have the on-screen timer.
It's not completely amateur hour anymore.
Not anymore.
You're doing well.
Not anymore, buddy. All right, here we go. Boom. What the hell?
I don't even know where to start with this guy anymore.
Well, how about this? How about this? He's helping the government of Saudi Arabia cover up a murder.
Yeah. Honestly, let's not even pull punches here. You know, this I think would apply more to you than to me because you're a lot more public and outspoken with your videos and the positions you take. But when people like Trump get all the power that they want,
yeah,
people like you and me end up in camps or shallow unmarked graves. And that's really not an exaggeration. That is dead serious. I actually mean that.
I saw someone on Twitter this morning, I think. They said something that it reminded me. I said something similar on my live stream on Friday, which is that they said the political parties show you who they really are when they think nothing can stop them. And I think that's what is happening certainly with Trump and with the Republican Party in general right now, is that they're being so openly awful because they know they've discovered, to their delight and my terror, that
and mine,
yeah, and a lot of people's and a lot of people who are way more threatened than two white guys, to their terror, that no matter what they do, they have a certain base of support that will never drop them. They have like 20% or so of the electorate that just doesn't care. They can be as racist and as misogynist and as pro-rape and as anti-immigrant and as cruel and vicious and awful as they possibly can imagine, and they will never lose the support of that base. And that's a horrifying thought.
Yeah, that makes sense as far as when they think no one can stop them, because apparently Mitch McConnell is going into the midterms campaigning on, we will cut your Social Security and health care.
Yeah.
And it's working. I mean, people still support that.
Yeah. Vote for us. We're going to fucking kill you.
Yeah, it's like some people, and I've said for a long time that conservatives will stand behind their candidate no matter what demons they have in their past, no matter what crimes they've committed. It doesn't matter. Whereas liberals lose elections because they'll have somebody who they agree with 98%, and they'll say, but they're not 100%. They're not the perfect candidate. I can't back them. And so you got people who, don't vote or think that, Jill Stein is an actual candidate, or, Gary Johnson. And then we end up with situations like this with Trump. It's like, get out. If you are registered, get out and vote, because it matters. And this is not a game. I mean, if you look at what's happening, I mean, America is, it's scary how much people who actually research these things say that current America is matching up with 1930s Germany.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at the most chilling part of that to me is if you look at the way the Nazis were treated by the mainstream culture and especially like the mainstream press of Germany before they took over, or before they started to really impose their most horrific measures. They were treated as as a joke, or as, well, just ignore them and they'll go away, or, well, you just need to know how to talk to them. You just need to engage them and see what they want, and you could reach a reasonable solution. All the same things that people are still saying about Trump supporters and about the Republican Party in general. It's the failure to recognize what this is. Like, these people mean you harm. You can't debate them. You have to outvote them. That's the only way to get past this.
The time for civility is pretty much over at this point.
Yeah, and they're the ones who ended it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the things that they support and that they back up and the people they defend, and it's just mind-blowing that anybody who still considers themselves a decent human being could support any of this.
Yeah.
And even for people who saw how horrible Trump was and how unqualified he was and how monstrous he was, I think even people who saw all that coming are shocked by how far this has gotten in just 2 years.
Oh yeah, it has. I was shocked by how quickly, for instance, the Muslim ban. That was his first week in office. That was one of the first executive orders he signed. One of the first things he did was to attempt to ban people of a particular religion from entering this country. I mean, it's not like they're hiding it. They're out in the open saying, "Hey, we got the power. We're going to use it. Fuck you, people." I mean, what else? What are we waiting for? What else do they have to do to convince you that this is really bad news?
They'd have to go after conservative white men.
Oh God. Well, I mean, they're going after conservative white men living in poverty, but they don't even care. They're just like, yeah, fuck those immigrants. Like, he's going to fuck you too, don't you? Like, you're screwed, genius. Fucking immigrants. Okay. Hope you like not having any health care or the ability to make enough money to live on or whatever. Like, I hope you enjoy it.
Why are people so terrified of immigrants in the first place? I don't get it.
I don't get it either. I mean, I guess it's just they're an evergreen scapegoat. You know, you can always blame your problems on them because there's always more immigrants, and there's always, even with demographic changes within the country, there's always going to be an out group. You know, there's always going to be a group of people that you can point at and say, well, they're coming in here and ruining everything.
I guess it comes from the fact that immigrants are going to be by definition different, and people who are different are always the enemy.
Yeah.
In some people's minds.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I remember when we're not that old. I remember when I was in elementary school. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. I remember when I was in elementary school in the 80s and the 90s when the United States as the melting pot, that was part of our social studies curriculum. Like, we were taught that was a part of the history of our country, and that was something that we were supposed to be proud of, that we were the nation of immigrants. People came from all over the country and that it made us a better country. It made us a better society. And now it's like we're going for the exact opposite of that. It's a complete betrayal of our ideals. Like, we've never quite lived up to those ideals. We used to pat ourselves on the back and say, like, yeah, nation of immigrants, hey, we're the melting pot. We never really lived that way. We always mistreated immigrants. But
at best it was more of a fruit salad where each individual thing was still identifiably its own, but it was all mixed together.
Yeah. Well, it's like, or certain ingredients in the soup would blame other ingredients in the soup for why the soup didn't taste good. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, they had to put those fucking beans in. You know, that's the problem. It's those fucking, why did you put fucking kidney beans in the soup? You know? And it's like, you know, you're all in the same soup. It's, you know, fucking celery. What?
That's that analogy left me speechless.
Yeah.
I love the way you delivered it, though.
Thank you. That's my indignant white bigot voice. For fuck's sake.
You'd be like Letterman, who had his generic foreign accent.
Yes. Oh, Letterman. Have you seen any of his interview show, his Netflix show?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah, some of it is pretty good. I haven't seen all of it. I haven't seen every episode, but I saw the Obama one that I watched, like, with almost tears in my eyes because I was like, please come back. That was a good one. I watched the George Clooney one. Malala Yousafzai was a really good one. It's just him, like, interviewing people one-on-one.
You don't have nearly the issues with Clooney you used to, do you?
No, because I found out that, you know,
he's actually a good guy.
He's actually a good guy for the most part, and well, you know, he's a super famous guy, and he's not afraid to be politically active. And for the most part, we're on the same side politically. He's very progressive, and I'm like, fuck, go George. And also, he made some good movies, and I was like, shit, okay, sorry, I'm sorry about making fun of you for the head bob thing. It's like, you know what, George, you want to bob your head, fucking go for it, man.
sort of like I used to despise Jim Carrey, but he's grown on me a bit over time. Yeah,
he's actually done some good work, and you're like, oh, I guess he's pretty good, actually, if he wants to be, you know?
Yeah. They're like, Adam Sandler has pretty much never wanted to be.
No. He did Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah.
And it's like, and he was like, all right, that's good. I did that. Now I can go back to the other crap.
He's happy to just keep doing the same thing to put money in the bank. I think Letterman is actually enjoying doing something different after all this time.
Yeah, I think so too. Because the new show could not be more different from the old show. I mean, it's still in front of an audience, but it's filmed obviously filmed like on a theater stage, and there's almost no set. It's just him and the guests and chairs. Yeah, it is. It's a lot like it. The look of it is a lot, and he also cuts to like pre-taped pieces where maybe he goes back to the person's hometown with them and he talks to their family or whatever. So it's very different from his old show.
It's not a 15-minute interview with somebody who's trying to sell something.
Right, exactly.
A movie, an album, a TV show,
Yeah.
It's actually getting a little bit more serious.
Yeah, it's good. Like, it's really good. And it's still, he's still cracking jokes and stuff, but it's not like, monologue, desk piece, 10-minute interview, desk piece, 5-minute interview. Like, it's definitely a departure. And it's good. I think he enjoys it. I think it looks like he enjoys doing it. So, yeah.
That's something I've been meaning to see, but like many things, it's just not enough time.
Yeah.
Not enough hours in the day. And then when I do have the time, I end up getting caught up in like a video game instead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, see,
it's like I can't watch this and listen to music at the same time, so the music's going to win out.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, see, I know for me, my problem is I work a lot. I'm always working on YouTube stuff, and then when I have time to spend, I want to spend it with my wife. And you know, so if we're watching something that we both are into, like right now we're almost finished with the second season of Making a Murderer on Netflix. We have 2 episodes left, so we're probably going to finish it like today. And so that's great. Like but I also really want to watch the 3rd season of Daredevil, which just dropped, and she's not into that at all. So I have to find like my own time to watch that. So it's like, oh, when am I going to watch Daredevil? I just don't have time because I have, you know, free time that I want to spend with her. I've got work to do, and
you
it's
still
like,
got to catch
shit.
up. You still got Doctor Who to catch up on. Have you been watching that at all?
I have not been watching that at all.
You're still at the beginning of the second
I'm at
season?
the beginning of the first Tenet season, and that's as far as I've gotten.
I'm still looking forward to you going through that so we can just have someone else to talk to about.
Well, yeah, I mean, someone in the live stream on Friday said, "Have you watched the new one?" And I'm like, "Shit, no. I'm still back on fucking David Tennant. I haven't even gotten."
Yeah. Billy Piper's still there for
yeah,
Christ's sake.
right. Like I'm still on the first companion. I haven't gotten anywhere with it. Like I just got done with Christopher Eccleston for Christ's sake. Yeah.
I'm still recommending that one.
Oh,
and
I do.
It's just, yeah,
I do want to watch it. I've enjoyed what of it that I've seen. I've enjoyed. I mean, I do want to get back into it. It's just, you know, so much. There's just so much, you know.
Give up sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
And just think you're only doing like 3 videos a week instead of 5.
Oh God! You know what happened? Well, what happened was I cut back to 3 instead of 5, but now I just put more work into the 3, so that the 3 are just a lot better than they would have otherwise been. So it still takes just as much time, but
more editing, but not as much just sitting and talking directly into the camera without any. I've noticed like you do the trick actually, and you do a lot of the cut, zoom in, zoom out a little bit. You know, changing the framing just a little bit. Is that done in post, or do you actually adjust the camera? And I was curious about that.
In the early episodes, I would frame a different shot. But what I discovered was if I only cut in a little bit in post and I applied just a very mild sharpening effect, it looks just as good. So I don't have to.
It's a lot easier.
Yeah, it's just to just do one. Basically for the Trek Actually videos now, it's one camera setup, and I just go straight through the script in order. And the cuts are to disguise, you know, separate takes, so I don't have to memorize the whole fucking script from beginning to end. So and the cut to a closer shot or a wider shot is just to disguise the you know, so it's not a jump cut. But yeah, it's all one take, it's all one camera setup, and then the cuts into a closer shot are done in post. Yeah.
Well, I still recommend doing the changing the premise from exploring Strange New Worlds to Don't Bother Strange New Worlds midstream. I think that would be a good topic for possible.
I think I'll add that to my list because that is a good subject. I'm doing the next 2 are going to be Captain Kirk centered. The next 2 proper ones. I'm doing a not actually Trek actually this coming week, which is going to be another comment response one. But then the next proper one, which will be next month, will be Captain Kirk themed. So
yeah. Captain Kirk, and then Chris Pine pops up in the middle of the shot, and you're like, wait, no, time out.
Yeah. Well, you know, actually, I get comments from people sometimes that it annoys me because it's like the entitlement of Star Trek fans, because I haven't really talked about the Chris Pine movies very much. I've just referenced them a little bit here and there. And sometimes people will say, please don't talk about J.J. Abrams' Star Trek when you're talking about real Star Trek. And that just makes me want to talk about it more.
It's all real Star Trek.
Yeah. It's like, fuck you.
Even the animated series is real Star Trek. You don't consider it canonical, or however you pronounce that.
Yeah.
But it's still real Star Trek.
Yeah, it just makes me want to do it more. People don't understand, like, because I mean, look, I don't.
Have you done much about Discovery directly, or I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I've done a couple. I haven't done a proper scripted episode about Discovery.
Like the last one, you talked about it in passing, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I haven't. I've done episodes. about Discovery, and I've referenced it, just like with the Kelvin verse movies, the Kelvin time movies. I've referenced them because like it's all Star Trek. Like I see no reason to draw a line. Like in the Prime Directive episode, I did a little bit where I talk about the opening beats of Star Trek Into Darkness, where they're on the alien planet and they're trying to prevent the volcano from erupting, and how Spock tries to get by on a technicality of not violating the Prime Directive, because I thought that was very relevant to the topic of the video. And it's all Star Trek. Like, why should I? It's not out of bounds. And I like those movies. I'm sorry, fellow Star Trek fans who don't like the Kelvinverse timeline. I like those movies. So I'm not going to just not talk about it.
Star Trek Beyond was much better than I expected, considering it was a movie that nobody involved seemed to want to make. No, it actually turned out really well.
Star Trek Beyond was great, which is why it'll be a shame if they end up not making another one. I mean...
They're having trouble getting the Chris's under contract, apparently.
The fucking Chris's don't want to... Chris... Which, I'm like, just back up the money truck, for Christ's sake. Just pay them the money. Pay him. He's Captain Kirk. Pay him. Because, the Star Trek Beyond was so good. And then the new one was supposedly... It was intended to be... It was going to be the first woman director of a Star Trek feature, which was very exciting.
I've read they're still talking about making it, even though they're not sure what the story's going to be about if they can't get these two under contract.
Yeah,
so I don't know how that's going to work.
So we're either going to have a Star Trek movie focused on the original characters without Captain Kirk, or with a new guy playing Captain Kirk. Which either way, it seems like that's not ideal.
They should get the guy who played Pike in Discovery to play Kirk.
That would be amazing. Oh yes, yeah, that's right. I'm Captain Kirk now too. What do you think of that?
All right, I think on that note, we've probably gone. We'll probably start wrapping up here.
Yeah, let's wrap it. We're veering off decidedly into Star Trek. So,
and we talked about Star Trek enough thematically during the actual topic of today's show. So So, like I said, that was not by design, but I think it worked out well that we allowed ourselves to do that.
Well, it's hard to talk about, how TV at least how American TV reflects its times without at least mentioning Star Trek, because it was so super political in the 60s, and it has certainly changed over the years.
And it's one of the few shows that's been around in some form or another for 50 years.
Right, yeah.
Like Doctor Who.
You can chart,
Doctor Who has never been especially political in the way Star Trek has.
Right.
Or very, very rarely.
Yeah.
Anyway... So that will wrap it up for this month. I'm going to try not to look at the calendar over here as I say that I expect that we'll be back next month with another episode.
That's right. So thanks for watching, everybody. And we'll see you next month, whenever the hell it winds up being. We'll see you next month. Thanks for watching, everybody.